got Andy Hamill, who actually describes himself as an ordinary Chester resident. He has previously worked in Chester schools and also Chester University. He's a Labour member. He likes cycling, and I'm sure he's got a few other things. He is now going to, if you can wave, Andy, and let everyone know where you are, that's great.
This is me.
Andy's going to talk to us about a terrorist organisation, I was told, that, XR is. Extinction Rebellion was classed as a terrorist organisation. And I look at Andy sat there in his living room, and I think he is the absolute spitting image of a wonderful Chester resident. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, David. Can I share my screen, Anne? Is that, can you allow that?
Share your
yes.
screen.
I will allow you.
That's very good of you. I have some slides to go alongside this.
Give me a minute.
Sorry, I'm rushing at it.
That's all right.
Thanks for the invitation, folks. Anyway, to come and talk to you. Some of you will know me from campaigning for Chris and around the city. I was in at the beginning of what's known as Chester XR. In fact, following a discussion with Colin Watson, I don't know how many of you know Colin, but it's his funeral tomorrow, so a sad day, as he died suddenly the week before last. But he was a key driver in setting up XR. Right.
You should be able to share. Yes,
it's
very sad.
Coming somewhere around now. So how does that look? Yeah, everybody
yes,
okay?
That looks good.
That looks great. That looks great.
Excellent. Okay. This is a talk that's been given all around the country at the minute. It is a cut down version. I'll do my best with it. It's the first. It's my first outing with this deck, as they refer to it, or set of slides. And these are, agreed by a group nationally. This is heading for extinction, which is what's happening to us. And it's a talk that people describe sometimes as having a V-shaped profile. And if you can just sort of imagine that, you start off, and I'm going to tell you some stuff that's going to take you down and down and down. I seriously advise people to try and stay for the end, because it does come up towards the end and lift your spirits, hopefully, a little bit. But if you leave halfway through, you might need some counselling. We'll talk more about what Extinction Rebellion is a little bit later on, but we are basically a non-violent, direct action, civil protest organisation. We are everyday citizens, and we're looking for a solution to the climate and ecological crisis. We've recognised that individual action, doing all your sorting and doing your best with your use of energy, is not going to be enough to tackle these crises which are upon us. And therefore, we must get our governments, both here at home and internationally, to take decisive action on our behalf. They must support and protect us, as they pledged to do when they came to power. Many of the world's most pressing problems are closely interlinked, and as we well know within political parties, at the heart of it all sits power, financial and governmental. We need to think about the political leaders, think about the global corporations, think about the financial institutions and the mega rich who take more than their fair share of the Earth's resources. It is impossible to do justice to global justice in just one slide, but we know some examples, and there are many others. People of colour are disproportionately affected by the adverse effects of climate change, particularly in the global south. And those are the people who often emit, or mainly emit, the least. It's hard to see how we're going to provide climate justice, how it can be achieved without social justice and a more just and equal society. Extinction Rebellion stands with the Black Lives Matter organization and advocate equal rights for everybody, including LGBTQ, refugees, famine, water stress, and air pollution. Our civilization is far more fragile than we like to think. And we've just had a wake-up call this year. And we can see how vulnerable our big, strong technological society really is. It gives us a timely clue what the much bigger and nastier monster of climate crisis would be like. So we're advocating we can't go back to a business as usual option. And XR aims to bring about lasting change that is socially fair. We're causing climate destruction and ecological destruction. This threatens our survival, the survival of living creatures and plants, as well as ourselves. And I'm going to start talking about the climate crisis. If you've got your pictures of one another arranged down the side of your screen, it might be a bit hard to see the bottom part of this. You might want to move it slightly, because the graph that I'm showing you here is referred to as a hockey stick graph, but it could well be hidden behind David, Anne, and Sally in my case, which is how Zoom is dealing with it. The scientific consensus is overwhelming. It's not new either. The original understanding that CO2 warms more than the air is something that was first identified back in 1856, and we have continued to add to the concentrations of CO2 in the air. You can see that the graph bobs along quite happily for the past 2,000 years with around 280 parts per million of CO2. And then what happens is basically the industrial revolution. We started burning fossil fuels on a huge scale. Scientists all over the world agree that 100% of global warming since 1950 is due to humans, and nearly all heating since 1850 is due to greenhouse gas emissions and other human activities. This chart shows how the global average temperatures have been rising in tandem with atmospheric carbon dioxide. It shows atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide over the last 2,000 years, the red line, and then the average annual temperature from when we measured it in 1880 through to 2019, the blue squiggly line on the end. It's called a hockey stick graph. It kicks up, and although there's a variation from year to year, overall CO2 trend is upward. Global average annual carbon dioxide concentration was around 411 parts per million in 2019. Each year brings new record levels, and the rate of increase in carbon dioxide concentration is accelerating. Increased CO2 causes an accompanying temperature rise, and that is locked in. We're already now at 1.1 degrees centigrade. Doesn't sound like a lot above pre-industrial levels, and we're heading for what could be either 3 to 4 degrees by the end of the century. Sorry, get that to move on. When you talk about global heating, you might say, well, the Earth's had several warm periods in the past. We're conscious of ice ages and warming up. What's the big deal? Well, it's true, there have been warm periods in the Earth's past, and these warm periods have not happened during our current human civilization. This chart is, it takes a bit of getting your head around, to be quite honest, this one, because it's taking the temperature anomalies. That's the differences between the average temperature and then spikes and changes. And it goes back over the last 20,000 years. So you can see from the evidence that we've got that for the last 10,000 years, during the formation of today's human civilization, we've had a very stable climate. That's called the Holocene period. We've been able to develop agriculture and cities. We've been able to spread out and cover across the surface of the Earth. Human civilization, as we know it, has not existed on a +2 degrees C Earth. And the human species has not existed at all on a 4 degree plus Earth. And to be quite honest, we don't know whether it can. We are moving into newly charted waters. Yep. Take me on. The climate crisis, though, is not something bad that might happen in the future. It's something bad that's happening right now. And you can look around the images that are put in front of you now, where we can see the effects of just 1.1 degrees of heating above pre-industrial levels. And you don't have to go too far to find news items happening currently at the minute of fires, of floods, and the strength of storms increasing. Indeed, the one, Francis, that's coming in tomorrow is an unusual thing for us to experience in August. And the speeds of wind and the increased melting of the ice are already having an impact. And we're going to see, certainly, if we continue locking in carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, this is going to get worse. The rate of sea level rise is accelerating and is unprecedented over the past century. Worst case projections of a 2-meter rise by 2100 can't be ruled out. And if you'd like to remember that 20 to 40% of the global human population live in regions that have already experienced warming of more than 1.5 degrees C. We've talked about 1.1 degrees C so far. We need to look into the future. We are heading for a 3 degree with current policies. That's even if we manage to meet our commitments. Given historic failures to curb emissions, we could be heading for 4 to 5 degrees C by the end of this century, which would be disastrous for much of the world's population. What will happen as the heating continues? Our options now are limited to a choice between an unmitigated disaster and a less bad disaster. Oops, sorry. World hunger is rising after being in decline for many years. More than 820 million people do not have enough to eat. Many global heating-driven extreme weather events, such as heat waves, heavy rainfall, coastal flooding, are likely to get more extreme, both in frequency and intensity. More areas will experience severe water shortages due to droughts and the melting of glaciers. Climate chaos is on track to produce mass displacement of somewhere between 200 million and 1 billion people by 2050. This is by far the greatest ever movement of people in the history of humankind. If global temperatures reach 3 degrees C as forecast by the end of the century, about 1/3 of the world's population will be living in extreme heat. This is a map from Climate Central. You'll be used to and quite familiar with it, apart from the red bit, possibly. And the red bit is indicating those areas that were going to be liable to flooding in just the next 30 years. This is a site where you can model different scenario, but even if we managed to get the CO2 emissions down in a very short time, the effect of them will carry on. We've locked in some of these changes as the CO2 persists in the atmosphere. The warming is serious at the moment, but there's a real risk that it could become even worse with feedback loops and tipping points, the types of thing that it's hard to predict quite what will happen when you get a chain of events. One example might be as the ice is melting, the surface of the ice sheets are becoming darker, and with the spoil, and that actually accelerates as it absorbs more heat. It accelerates the melting, going faster than we've considered before. In summary, the longer we leave it, the more difficult it gets. We need to take drastic action to reduce emissions now to avoid having to take even more drastic measures later. Coronavirus has shown us what drastic measures can look like. We don't want to have to suddenly turn off the economy just to survive. The sooner we take action, the less painful it will be. To have a good chance of staying below 1.5 degrees of warming, global CO2 emissions need to reach zero by about 2025. If we had begun reducing emissions from 2000, 10 years after the world knew for sure that we had to cut emissions to avoid dangerous climate change, a reasonable chance to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees C would have required reductions of around 4% a year. That could have been relatively easily achieved. Starting now, we need a lot steeper reduction year on year. If we leave it later, we will need steeper reductions still. In 2019, a hard-hitting international report backed by the United Nations had these things to say about the impact of humans on the planet. Nature is declining globally at rates unprecedented in the human history, and the rate of species extinction is accelerating. Around 1/4 of species are already threatened with extinction. Species are being destroyed at rates at least 10 to 100 times higher than the background average extinction rate over the past 10 million years. Humans affect 3/4 of the land, 2/3 of the ocean, 3/4 of fresh water, leaving little room for anything else. 85% of our wetlands have been destroyed. A mass extinction of species is already underway. There have been 5 previous mass extinctions in the Earth's history. The last one was 66 million years ago. The current one is caused by exploding human consumption, not natural events. What's more, humans know that it's happening, and why. That is why it's better called an extermination. Today, by biomass, the mammals of the world are represented like this: 60% livestock, 36% humans, only 4% of wild animals. If we do nothing else, we need to stop CO2 emissions from fossil fuel burning. Everything else is secondary. If we don't do that, then we will fail. It's that straightforward. To have any chance of keeping below 2 degrees C, we need to stop emitting CO2 rapidly, entirely, and forever. Personal action on its own will fail. It is critical that our new approach encourages governments, international organizations, and corporations to change. And that is exactly what XR are here to do. What have we tried so far? We've had global agreements, country-level legislation, legal challenges, traditional campaigning, and personal commitments to reduce emissions. None of our efforts have worked. How do I know? This is how. Since the formation of the IPCC in 1988, we have emitted more CO2 knowingly than all of our emissions previously. And there are no signs that the tendency is changing, even when you include the effects of COVID-19. When people tell you that we're making progress, look at this graph. You remember some of those agreements and withdrawals from agreements. And if the graph keeps going up like it's currently doing, then we're failing. The curve might flatten or reduce this year due to the impact of COVID, but to avoid failure, any flattening must be followed by fast and deep cuts. We need to see the curve flattening now, then falling fast to zero, and then staying at zero forever. Until we do, it's not working. When the rules don't work for us, we must break them. You can recognize the pictures, I'm sure, and you can see that these are people who were claimed, if not to be terrorists, at least to be rebellious folk. And so they stood out, they stood up, they stepped up to say and stand for what they believe. You may have noticed that throughout history, elites with power and money tend not to give away rights without being pressured to do so. If you think of the universal vote, women's suffrage, gay marriage rights, racial discrimination, liberty from colonial rule, equality under the law, think of apartheid, think of the Velvet Revolution in Eastern Europe in 1989. Civil resistance, also called disobedience or non-violent direct action, as Extinction Rebellion prefers to call it, means normally law-abiding citizens breaking rules and laws as a way to force change in a system that is refusing to change. That is why actions are Extinction Rebellion's main tactic. Excuse me a minute. I just need to get a light. That helps me and possibly you. In order to be able to carry out disruptive actions and create dilemmas for authorities, we need people who are willing to do things that risk arrest. Arrest itself is also a form of disruption as it uses police resources and court time. And we've found that court cases have created thousands of opportunities to present the issues to the judiciary. However, for every person that is what we call arrestable, somebody who's willing to be arrested to make a point, there are more than 20 other people who are part of the movement who support them or help the movement in other ways. We've got artists, legal observers, trainers, cooks, singers, samba bands, organisers, climbers, the list goes on. Joining Extinction Rebellion doesn't mean you have to get arrested. You don't. There are so many ways you can help, and we really need you, whether you have an hour a week or able to give up your job to volunteer full time. I particularly want to draw your attention to our top tasks, and these will be things that are familiar to you as Labour activists. They're part of a mass mobilisation strategy: leafleting, stalls, phone banking, door knocking, giving this talk, and house meetings. If you can do any of these things, you can help grow the movement as fast as possible. Civil disobedience works when it's a mass movement, which is broad and diverse. We are ideally aiming to have 1 million people actively involved. Whether we manage to realise that next week or not, we shall see. We have 3 big, clear demands. The first one is to tell the truth. Tell the truth about the situation that we're in. That means the kind of information that I covered in the first part of this talk. Everybody should be told about this clearly, not like the confusion and lies we've seen from governments over the pandemic. The second demand is for the government to set a legally binding target for greenhouse gas emissions to reach net zero by 2025. The third demand is for a citizens' assembly to decide how to address the issues. The recommendations must be legally binding. They'd be commissioned and funded by the government, but independently organised and run. XR would not be involved in the setup nor running the assembly. The aim is to strengthen our democracy. You don't need permission to get involved with XR. You can visit the website for all sorts of information on our demands, our values, events and groups. You can also sign up for the UK newsletter. If you've got your phone on you, you can take a photo of the QR code and it'll take you straight there. Although the QR code is hiding under Dave Southall at the minute on my screen. If I can leave you at the end of this with 2 key takeaways. First of all, do not believe for a second that if you have made your personal commitments, then you've done your bit. Forcing government action is necessary. Personal commitments are not enough. Secondly, do not believe for a second that XR have got your back, that you can sit back and relax because we're acting on your behalf. We need people, lots more people. We need you, and the planet and life needs you as well. Our next local election is coming up on Friday. There is a warm-up to the National Rebellion, which takes place on the 1st of September in Manchester, London and Cardiff. But we are collecting and recruiting and giving out leaflets, and maybe social distanced leafleting and permissible singing and that type of stuff will be going on from 2 p.m. at the Old Dee Bridge in Chester. You may have seen these on social media or increasingly around the place. Do feel free to come along and join us, or at least say hello and get involved. Our main contact details are there with QRs on the posters as well. And that is me done, David. Thank you very much for listening.